Hello, Camp Pros, and welcome to the CampHacker podcast. My name is Travis Allison from Go Camp Pro. I am really pleased to welcome today Dr. Daniel Theriault, who is going to talk to us about his experiences teaching rec and leisure studies. Daniel and I wanted to talk today and focus on inclusion, racism, and privilege in the recreation industry. That's Daniel's particular expertise. And we're going to both apply it to camp because Daniel has some great camp experience as well. What I want to acknowledge from the very beginning is that we have two white guys talking about racism, and we have purposely done that. At Go Camp Pro, we're trying to take ownership over the fact that we are educating ourselves and not asking Black, Indigenous, people of color summer camp pros to educate us as a company. Those educations that we are taking, as much as we can afford to right now, we're paying for those as much as possible. But I did want to take this moment to for a couple of white guys to try to talk to other white people in the industry about the need for this movement in our industry, and for us to take responsibility for educating ourselves and not asking of folks to educate us for free. So this is really just a starting point. And Daniel, I'm so grateful to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me, Travis.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So can you tell me your camp story?
My camp story.
Yeah. How you started a camp with, let's start there, and then I'll ask you a couple of other things.
Well, that's my mother's fault. She came into my room one day in May when I was about 16 years old and said, "You're not going to be at home this summer. You're going to find a job." And as luck would have it, the very first place that we went to was a summer camp.
Mm-hmm.
And when I walked into the front door, I was extremely nervous. I naturally knew very little about this camp, very little about the camp world. But the hiring process was, let's say, short. Once the hiring manager realized that I could use a chair successfully, she happily hired me and said, "I need you here tomorrow morning first thing."
Yeah.
And so I fell into it like that, but I came back to summer camp for a number of years because I realized so quickly that it's so much more than this place where kids go to have fun or this place that kids go because their parents make them. Rather, it's this place where young people learn about who they are, maybe more importantly, who they could be.
Mm-hmm.
So for that reason, I came back to camp for the following 8 summers.
Amazing. Amazing. Was there a moment that you can think of that you said to yourself, this is, like, what is the moment that gave you that realization that this is more than just a place for parents to put their kids for the day while they're working, and that it could provide some bigger, more life-changing is pretty cliche in this industry, but really something that has a bigger impact on a child than just a place to go for a day or a week or a session?
Sure. I think the moment that immediately comes to mind is the last day of my first year in camp.
Mm-hmm.
It was a day where that, to be honest, at that time, I kind of welcomed. I was very tired from the
Mm-hmm.
summer. Yes, I had a wonderful time, but the days were long. It was very hot. The work was very challenging. I was ready to move on. But as the parents came to pick up their children, I noticed a number of young people who clearly just didn't want to leave. And many were in tears at that moment, saying goodbye to friends they had made, saying goodbye to the mentors that they had. And then in that moment, the power and the impact that camp had on me instantly became clear. Suddenly I didn't want to leave. and I reflected how at home that I was and how valued that I felt. So I think there were two different but very powerful sides, right? That, you know, I could see the power that camp had for them, but also the power camp had for me.
Yeah. 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 I often think that as an industry, we could do much better at handling that transition back to my wife and co-director Beth often called it back into the mundane world, that you know we had been in this hyper real world for this period of time, and then we sort of just dump everybody back into their other life, and the camp leaders are exhausted, and but we don't do very well at helping our staff transition, our kids transition, or even ourselves transition back into the rest of the year after uh, such an amazing and intense emotional experience on top of the exhaustion and all of those things. But I think society in general tends to do that for lots of things. I think we do it for people in the military who have the same sort of intense level of experience. Hyper competitive athletes have the same thing. It's actually a new documentary I've just saw coming out about Olympic athletes and talking about what it means when that's taken from them. And I always think that there's such many parallels there to this, as you say, a realization at the end of camp, and then we sort of just dump people back into their own thing. That's an aside from today's discussion. Daniel, I'm so grateful for you for reaching out. I had been posting about Go Camp Pro and the camp industry's need to be conscious of and intentional in addressing racism and privilege and summer camp. And as I said in the intro, you're teaching rec studies, and I wanted to just open it up and say, how for you did you come to this realization that we weren't addressing specific issues, that we weren't a welcoming organization loosely, but just an industry that hasn't been welcoming, or in fact has been blocking people from enjoying the things that we purport to love and want to share with others?
I think, like a lot of powerful lessons, that took me a long time to learn, but there were minor hints, and then there was a very powerful moment. So the minor hints were thinking back to my time in college and realizing that topics like race, topics like racism, topics like power and privilege were usually talked about within a single class period during a 4-year major. Right? Mm-hmm. So there was a very clear message that was being sent that this is a minor part of the work that we do, but there was also a message being sent that we as a field have much more to learn on how to do this well. But I think the major moment that really clarified that as a field we have a lot of work to do was when I got my first position within higher ed. I was fortunate enough to be hired on at an HBCU, and teaching at an HBCU as a white male, there were a number of very normal, natural parts of the recreation and leisure major that I'd never really thought about before that instantly became very clear. When I talked about the narrative, for example, of where the field of leisure studies came from, it suddenly became very clear that the major people that we talk about, people like John Muir, for example,
yep,
they're white, and they're very often white men. Mm-hmm. And so it was in that moment that it became very clear to me that there is a sizable portion of the population that would like to be involved in this field, but we're sending these messages to them, even when they are in college, that you're not welcome here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if, Daniel, from speaking to your students, one thing I should say, in case people don't know the acronym HBCU, historically Black College and Universities, I wonder from your students and their feedback, I think I know that we live in a bubble of privilege and don't even see the things that are happening to, in our discussion case, people who work at summer camps, but in the wider recreation industry, we're not even seeing these things. Was there something that, or a story or two that stood out for you that was really a revelation? It's like, I can't imagine that this is happening in this industry that I love, this experience that gives me so much pleasure being outside and doing all these things together in recreation. Is there something that stood out for you?
There were quite a few moments. I think one of the more powerful moments, though, was when I taught the outdoor recreation class. And this is a class where kind of the primary goal is that we're going to plan and go on a one-night hiking trip. So for me, as a lifelong lover of the woods and hiking and camping, this was an exciting moment for me. But when I brought that excitement to the first day of class, I could immediately see that I was the only one in the room that was very excited for this trip. Many were not very happy at all. And when I talked to them more about where that fear came from, I immediately heard in much more detail about how racism is shaping and has shaped the outdoor recreation field. That many of my students, for example, were told by their families that this is not a place that you can safely go. Mm. That many people in the room had gone on camping trips themselves and had been victims of racist treatment while they were there. And so it was this moment that for many people, that recreation is not just this natural site where we can all go and have a beneficial time, but there's a lot of deeper work that we have to get to make recreation this beneficial space for Black people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we've certainly seen in the news examples of this problem, thinking about the birdwatcher in Central Park and his experiences, and a lot of this has been brought to the surface in the last couple of months as well. We're recording in the middle of July in 2020. I suspect that this topic is going to stay relevant for quite some time, especially if we, on purpose, keep it relevant and keep this discussion going. So I wonder what for you have been some of your best lessons for you in expanding the definition of who is welcome and who is a part of outdoor recreation. What are some of the biggest things that you've learned in the last few years about expanding the definition of who belongs?
Well, I think there are 3 core tasks that we have to undertake to make recreation a welcoming place for a wider range of people. And the first is that we have to work to see power and privilege. And when I say the word power, I'm not referring to the power that one person has. I'm referring to the power systems that shape the lives that we lead, things like racism, things like classism. So we have to work to really see that power, because it hides in the normal and natural ways that the world works. We also have to take a sense of responsibility for our role within those networks of power. It's very easy for many people to say that yes, that racism is this major problem within the world, but I don't play a role in that. My camp does not play a role in that. And the result of that line of thinking is that you don't have to take a hard look at what you can do to work for positive change. And then I think the last sort of piece of that is there is definitely a need for action. And when a lot of people think about the anti-racist kinds of actions that we can take, it's this all or nothing kind of view. That is, you are either at home and you do nothing, or you're out in the road and you are right in the middle of a riot, kind of holding up signs, things like that. But there's an incredibly wide range of very little risks that you can take that will have a positive impact on the way the world works. So I think those are the three major things.
Right. And I'm going to come back to what are the small risks that we can take to be a part to actively engage in this. So I come back to it, as I want to wrap up with some really practical things for camps to do. But I was, you have a great new paper out called Vulnerable Teaching in Leisure Studies, and I appreciated that it was in a lot of ways you talking about mistakes that you had made, how you reevaluated them and changed your process in your classroom based on that. And I was really struck by the wisdom that you're drawing on being the wisdom of Black feminism. Can you talk us through what that means and how that applies, how Black feminism applies to expanding your teaching, and then how we can think about it as part of a way to address problems in the recreation industry?
For most people, the way that camp works is that campers are treated the same way when they walk in the door. Like they need the same things from camp, like they can benefit from camps in exactly the same way. What Black feminism does is it says that the experiences of Black women are unique. And so what that says to the camp world is that we need to respond to the Black women we serve and to the Black women that work with us in unique ways, realizing that they move through the world and are shaped by systems of injustice at the nexus of race, of gender, and of capitalism. So and the kind of hopeful message that Black feminism can send to the camp world is that if camp can be used as a force to limit, to resist those unjust ways that Black women are asked and forced to move through the world, that we will liberate not only Black women, but we will liberate everyone, since those forces of injustice touch all of our lives in some way.
And I think an understanding of that, or a beginning understanding of that, means that we begin to see that in that case for Black women, but thinking about recreation or in summer camp in particular, thinking about the experience of Black families, Black children, is that there is not a single identity that there's not a single identity for them, but it's also there's not a single thing that is putting some oppression on them. That is coming from several different angles, and we need to be sensitive to that and conscious of that and intentional about how we deal with all of those things. So I wonder from a practical side. So let me go back to the 3 points you're saying. What are some of the things that as recreation professionals, as summer camp professionals, we can do or should be thinking of doing that are in the middle of the risk perspective that you laid out, that spectrum? Right. What are some of the things that we can do to be helping the families that we hope to serve through summer camp and our staff as well?
Sure. So I think on a personal level, one of the biggest things that you can do is to normalize discomfort. And when you begin to talk about and resist racism as a white person, there's going to be a lack of comfort there. And for many people, that can come from just a simple lack of knowledge, but it can come as well from the fact that you are going to confront who you think that you are, right? So there, might be people who are listening to this podcast that have been in the camp world for a long time, and they think they're very good at it, right? I think that I am very good at camp, but then suddenly there's this aspect of camp that you don't know much about. Or you might think of yourself and say, okay, well, I am not a racist person. But then suddenly, as you look to see the way that you are involved in the ways that without meaning to, that you hold up the normal and natural racist ways that the world works, that's painful. Right? That's painful to see that you are a part of that process. So I think the first part of that is to normalize that lack of comfort. One more kind of small risk that you can take on a personal level is to read what is painful. Okay. Right. For many people, when you begin to read about racism in all of its various manifestations and forms over the last 400 years, that's going to be painful to see what a segment of our population has gone through, right? But when you read those words and when you continue to read those words, you will be in a better place to serve the Black campers that you have, okay? And I think the last thing, and this is probably a very small kind of first phase of this, is to just think long and hard about the films and the shows that you watch. Think about how people of color are being represented within those films. Films have come a long way towards not solely representing people of color as manual laborers, as not very smart and things like that. But think about how people of color are being represented, and if they're not being represented in holistic and very complex ways, use your dollars to support a different movie.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. And so many good starting points. You're talking about the sitting in discomfort, and I even in this podcast discussion, I can hear how differently I am speaking than if I was just talking about camp,
For sure.
in my own hesitation or seeking the right words or being careful. And I think that that is just a life that a committed summer camp professional has to dig into. There's lots of hard work in this, and there's going to be lots of mistakes, and that's just the price of what we need to do, to my mind.
Sure.
I appreciate that these small personal things that we need to do for our own development. Can you think of, or can you help us work through what are some of the things that, as an industry, summer camp specific industry, that we can be doing, should be doing to expand who feels welcome at camp? I have said a number of times, I think that summer camp is, and summer camp professionals are great at standing out in their beautiful place in the woods with open arms and saying, come on out here, but doing nothing to make that, other than saying this place is here for you, doing absolutely nothing to bridge the gap between home and the summer camp experience. What are some of the things that you think that the industry should be thinking about practicing to make it a place of welcome for all?
I think there are multiple levels at which people in the summer camp field can work for change. One of the major ones is within the language that we use. So when I worked in the summer camp field, for example, we had a multi-day camp event that was called Color Wars.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about the experience of people of color within the US, that throws that name into a very new light. There may well be folks of color that are there for the day, that work there, that see that name for the first time, and that sends a very powerful kind of message about what they know and about how welcome that they really are.
Right.
One more level at which we can work for change is to think about the policies that we have. Okay, so think about who we value and who we hire for these camp roles and why we hire those kinds of people. And I think one more way is to think about the land on which the camp is held.
Mm.
Because the camp naturally was not always here. And we need to think about who lived there prior to that camp program and what the land was used for. There was a summer camp that was not too far from where I used to live, and the town that the camp was held in was 90% Black.
Mm.
But the users of that camp were over 90% white, okay? And the reason is that the Black residents of that town used that land to fish for a very long time. And then when the land was bought and the use was changed, they were essentially told that the form of recreation that you value, that you want to use this land for, we're not going to do that here anymore, right? So I think there are a number of levels at which we can work for change within the camp field.
Yeah. And I think those are big thoughts, big structural things. I think that there's some practical pieces, not that those weren't practical, I don't mean to make it seem that way, but that I think some of the things that will help us expand the kids who feel comfortable at camp is certainly representation on staff. And that we will have to change and be super intentional about how we do recruiting for staff going forward so that kids feel comfortable there when they can see their own face reflected in the leadership of a camp.
Sure.
Does your experience or your students, you have lessons from your students about how to make them, you've talked about ways to help them feel more comfortable. Is there any other things you can think of that would get a college student, that would help us get better at getting college students to work at camps that camps might be missing? Is there any other elements to that?
Sure. And I think there are two ways that I want to respond to this question. And the first is to think about how we get those that we hire ready to work at camp. That is, I think we can create more time when we train our people. We can create more time when we meet to talk about problems of power and privilege. And what those moments do is they begin to create this new norm where this is a context that we are going to talk about racism, that we're going to talk about classism, and just simply creating that room for people to raise a question, to share a problem that they don't know how to deal with. That by itself can be powerful. And I think when you move that process back a bit and you look at who you are trying to recruit to work in the camp field and how, think very long and hard about the ways and where you market the fact that you have a position. Okay, so in the US, for example, there are a lot of HBCUs that have recreation programs, okay? And what a fantastic opportunity to build a relationship and say that you would be welcome here, that this is a place where who you are and your experience will be valued. And I think those are two of kind of the major things that we can do.
I think even a camp that is willing to go to a school, that an HBCU or some other school that they're trying to draw from a more diverse staff. I think a lot of the first parts of that exercise, you have to be there to build trust with those students that you're hoping to recruit. You have to, Absolutely. I think you have to spend time listening in there even before you start recruiting, to be trusted as part of that. And I think camp professionals take a lot of pride in their the value of relationships, working on relationships, and that the effort that a lot of summer camp professionals would put into engaging a child who they find problematic, like all of that, exhausting patience, etc. We're going to have to find a similar place to put ourselves in a position just of persevering on listening and relationship building in order to take any of these steps.
Right. That's very well said, Travis. And I think that you are 100% correct in that building that level of trust first will be absolutely critical. When we look at the last 150 years of recreation within the US, there has been a repeated and powerful message sent that Black people are not welcome, Black people are not safe within white-controlled recreation contexts. And so viewed through that lens, it's very easy to see how this one-time kind of moment of saying, oh, come on down here and work might not be received very well, okay? And for, those that try to recruit at an HBCU for the first time and things do not go very well, I think the best piece of advice that I can share with you is to continually respond with love.
Right.
And to do a lot of listening while you are there, and really working to see how camp can be a positive force within the lives that they lead, and realizing that for some people, a camp might not be the answer, and that's absolutely okay.
Right. Right. And I think also that this relationship building will take time. We're not going to fix 400 years of problems by waking up in 2020 and saying, okay, we're changing things that because I, as the white camp person, saying we're just going to fix this, that this is going to be quick. It certainly will not be easy, but I don't see any way that it's going to be quick either because of all of the history. Daniel, do you have any final thoughts or ideas that you think would be good for people to be considering, actions for people to take that you haven't mentioned or that I haven't asked about?
When you begin to work to see and respond to racism within both your work and your life, it feels like you're walking the wrong way down a moving sidewalk.
Mm.
It feels wrong. There are going to be people that are looking at you saying, what in the world are you doing here? Don't you know that we're all supposed to go that way? The work is very difficult because you're fighting the natural way that the sidewalk moves. You're fighting through people that are all walking in the reverse way. But I think the challenge is to view that lack of comfort, to view that feeling that you are doing the wrong thing as a sign that you are on the right path, and as a sign that you need to continue to keep working.
That's a great place to end us off. Dr. Daniel Theriault, I want to thank you for your time today. I'm grateful for you reaching out and for you giving us time on this discussion. For those of you who are watching this or listening to this, we will post show notes where the CampHacker show notes usually are on camphacker.tv/podcast, and some resources that Daniel shared with me, and some links to the things that we've talked about here today. Daniel, if people want to follow up with you, they have any questions, what's the best way to get in touch with you? Just as a casual follow-up to some of the stuff that we talked about today.
Sure. So if you would like to send me an email, I can be reached at theriaud@appstate.edu.
Great. And I'll make sure that goes in the show notes too, as well. Excellent. Daniel, thank you.
You're very welcome.
All right. Thanks for the evening, friends.